Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're starting a few minutes behind schedule. I apologize. We are so excited to be at the Sunflower Foundation, and I know it can be a little tricky finding this space, so I wanted to make sure everybody could get here. We are thrilled to have you here and believe that we have two wonderful presenters that will leave you with some information and hopefully some opportunities to share your learning with other people when you leave here today. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you haven't had a chance, please sign in at your table. There are QR codes in the middle. There's one labeled sign in, and there's also one that is the evaluation at the end. And we would just love it if you would be sure to provide that information at the end and the beginning. It helps us to know who's coming to our events and who we need to work on getting to come. So thank you for doing that. If you prefer information in Spanish, we do have some folders with Spanish resources inside. Just let us know, and one of the PARS staff can provide that for you. We have them setting aside. We also have a fundraiser going, and we'll do our little raffle at the end. And if you're interested, it's for 2 KU tickets versus Texas Tech on the 28th. And it's over $400 value with dinner to Johnny's as well. So if you're interested, those tickets are a $25 donation to PARS. Restrooms are located right off where you came in, off the elevator and the stairs towards the back. All kinds of treats and drinks in the room right behind us. Please help yourself, make sure you're comfortable, do whatever you need to do. We're just thrilled to have you. So this past November, the DEA released a public safety information alert indicating that 6 out of 10 fentanyl-laced prescription pills contained a lethal dose of fentanyl. Illicit fentanyl contributed to over 107,000 drug poisonings in 2021. It can be found in communities of all sizes from coast to coast. Fentanyl is in our state, in our county, and in our city. Therefore, we must do our best to be highly informed to protect one another. So I would love for you to join me in welcoming Intelligence Group Supervisor Cheryl Waugh and Community Outreach Specialist Kimberly Pena-Brugman from the DEA Kansas City District Office. First up is Cheryl.
Thank you, Mandy. Thanks, everybody, for being here. My name is Cheryl Waugh, as Mandy indicated. I'm an intelligence group supervisor for the DEA Kansas City office. That's actually located in Overland Park, Kansas. I've been with DEA for about 17 years now. The last 15 of that is in Kansas City. I didn't know anybody when I moved to Kansas City, and now I'm a lifelong Kansas City Midwest girl, apparently. So I am a Buffalo Bills fan. I don't know if that turns anybody off, but that's where I grew up. I had an aha moment about a year ago. I went on family vacation. That's a picture of my family on vacation. We hired somebody to take pictures. You'll see, so I'm the second one in. My niece is the third one in. Right before we went on vacation, one of my niece's classmates died of a drug overdose. So the parents of the victim invited DEA to come out to the school to talk to the kids about what we're seeing, what the dangers are, why things are so dangerous right now. And my niece said to me when I told her, hey, I'm going to come to your school, she was very excited, as a teenager would be. She said to me, what is it that you do? And of course, she knew that I worked at DEA, but she didn't know what I did. So we started talking, and I started talking about the things that we're seeing, the things that we're seeing in Kansas City, the things we're seeing in Kansas. The point is we started talking, and I realized I had never even talked to my family and loved ones before about what I do or what I see. It's so important for us to talk. It's so important for us to share information. So that's why I'm excited to be here today. I hope I give you some nuggets that you can take back that might impact you personally, or you might be able to take back to your family and loved ones that can help decrease the numbers that we're seeing that are so scary right now. So I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about our organization and what DEA is and where DEA is and all that stuff. I'm going to talk mostly about fentanyl because I know that's the big item in the news right now and the big thing affecting our communities. But I'm also going to touch upon some of the other drugs that are impacting Kansas, Shawnee County, Topeka, and our country generally. So you'll see, I hope I get the numbers right because I'm not looking at them. But we do have 251 DEA offices across the country. A lot of people don't realize how big our foreign footprint is. We have 92 offices in 69 countries around the world. It's one of the largest footprints of any federal agency. We're a small agency of about 10,000 employees. By contrast, a bigger agency like FBI has about 35,000 employees. So that's just a map of our domestic offices. I'll talk about our area right here in a second. And those are our foreign offices. Right here in Topeka, we are standing in the St. Louis DEA division. We cover all of the state of Kansas, all of the state of Missouri, and the Southern District of Illinois. So we have 5 offices in Missouri, 2 offices in the Southern District of Illinois, and 4 offices in the state of Kansas. So our offices in Kansas, the Overland Park office that I work out of, then we have a resident office in Wichita, and we have posts of duty in Topeka and Garden City. So what are we seeing right now? And again, you guys know a lot of what we're seeing, but there are 2 cartels from Mexico that are primarily responsible for supplying the drugs in our country. Those 2, they're priorities for us as far as our mission, the Sinaloa cartel and Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG. You'll see on that map, what's interesting to me, so I'm a numbers analytics person, right? So when I look at that map, I see, okay, there's the striped areas are those areas that are being contested by those 2 cartels as far as territory. About half of the landmass between Mexico and the United States is being contested. Obviously, that's a very strategic area for those cartels. If they control the land borders between Mexico and the United States, they control what goes over the border into the United States. And then on the Gulf of Mexico, most of that is being contested right now. Those are obviously the seaports to the eastern United States and also to Europe. So very strategic areas that the cartels are battling over right now. And that's the worldwide impact of those 2 cartels. You'll see it's not just relegated to the United States or Canada. They have primarily supplied around the globe for the last several years. So the cartels get the drugs over the border. They are as organized as any Fortune 500 company. They are experts in logistics. Once the drugs get over the border, then they work with other entities or they have subsets of their entity to ship drugs by land, air, sea across the country. Keep in mind the business is a profit-driven business. So getting the drugs further across the border, there's a higher profit margin. So there is incentive for the cartels to get it further north and further east. For instance, a pill, a fake fentanyl pill, or a fake pill that contains fentanyl might cost $1 in Arizona. Here, it might be between $4 and $8. Up in New York City, it might be $10 to $12. So there is incentive to transport those drugs further from the southwest border. Once they get over the border, of course, how do you get drugs to their destinations? We see a variety of concealment methods from simple to very complex. Sometimes you see drugs just sitting on back seats of vehicles. Sometimes you see drugs sitting in suitcases. And then sometimes you see drugs. Now, who would have thought looking at a fire extinguisher that there might be heroin in it? But that was on the top right, you can see the picture of heroin being extracted from a fire extinguisher. So what have we seen? And this is what's all in the news right now, right? What have we seen over the past several years? What we've seen is a huge increase in the number of drug poisoning deaths in our country. In the past 5 years or so, we've seen over 50% increase in drug-related deaths, drug overdose deaths. At the same time, and again, I said I'm an analyst, I'm a numbers person. At the same time, what did we see at the border? You know, I said most of our drugs come from the southwest border, come over from Mexico. The number of CBP seizures of fentanyl during that same time period drastically increased. And I think that's 2019 to 2022, there was over a 400% increase in the seizures of fentanyl. If we could have looked at those numbers, we would have been able to anticipate the numbers of drug poisoning deaths drastically increasing. Fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than morphine. It's 50 times more potent than heroin. We would have been able to tell that this was going to happen. So why fentanyl? My family and loved ones, they always ask me, well, why? What's so exciting about fentanyl? It is super cheap for the cartels to produce. They can do it without massive areas of land. You know, when you're growing cocaine, you have to have a lot of land, and that land can be detected by law enforcement just flying over it, right? But if you can make something that's in a warehouse that's behind closed doors, it's going to be harder for law enforcement to tell that you're doing that. And then it's extremely potent. I just talked about how much more potent it is than heroin and morphine. It's an extremely potent drug. What does that mean for the users? Well, at first what it meant for the users was, hey, these cartels and distributors would mix fentanyl in with their drug, and then the user would say, wow, that was really good. I got a really good high. And then they'd want that again. What it means now that it's more in the public, now that people know that it's there, there's actually a market for fentanyl. Not everybody is being, foiled as far as, hey, I'm ingesting this and I didn't know it was there. Yeah, we still have that segment, but we also have a segment of drug users that are seeking out fentanyl because of the high that it provides. So as Mandy said when she was doing the introductions, what has that transpired to? Over 66% of our drug overdose deaths in 2021. That 107,000 number is 2021 numbers. We don't have 2022 numbers yet. We're thinking that those are going to be closer to the 110,000 range, but we don't have those numbers yet, so we'll stick with 2021. 66% involved synthetic opioids, generally fentanyls. Something to kind of keep in mind is that fentanyl and opioids are not the only things causing overdose deaths. Okay, there's other drugs that cause that. You'll see that 28% of drug overdose poisonings in 2021 involved psychostimulants. Psychostimulants, generally methamphetamine, ecstasy, ADHD drugs, that sort of thing. And this is a graphic that's super sobering. I think it's very impactful. There's more drug overdose deaths in 2021 than there were car crash deaths, suicides, firearm deaths. That's what we're looking at now, and that's what we need to reverse. We need to reverse that trend. Some of the other drug trends that we're seeing, I'll show a slide later on that shows that methamphetamine is our primary drug of concern because we have so much of it in the Midwest. That is, by and large, what we're seizing. Obviously, fentanyl is also a primary drug of concern based on the fact that it's causing more deaths. But what we see with methamphetamine users, they act very erratically, they act violently. So there's other issues, and not just drug overdose deaths that are acquainted with methamphetamine. Marijuana, what we've seen over the past 10 years, we're moving from, again, the big fields of marijuana plants that are being grown to more hydroponically grown marijuana, THC extraction labs. What does that do? It makes the drugs that we ingest, or that hopefully not we, but that people ingest stronger, more potent. What we've seen from a law enforcement standpoint is that even people using marijuana now, they can act erratically because of that THC content being so high in the products that they're ingesting. More local numbers for everybody here. State of Kansas, a couple interesting things to me. Statewide deaths, obviously that's following the national trend. Huge increase in statewide drug overdose deaths over the past 5 years, 73%. That's kind of on par with what the country is seeing as a whole. Most of those are involving opioids. Another obviously large portion of those are involving methamphetamine. Why do I keep saying involving? If you're do I have any scientists or chemists here? Okay. So chemists and scientists, if you talk to them, are very loath to attribute a drug poisoning death to a specific drug if multiple drugs are present. So we might know how potent fentanyl is, but if there's fentanyl and something else, then they're not going to say that the fentanyl caused that death. So what do these numbers mean? We're seeing a lot of people mixing drugs, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And again, you can kind of see the percentage increases of overdose deaths involving certain drug types. We're seeing fentanyl is mixed with everything. So some more interesting stats, again, for numbers people. Not all states report drug-specific involvement to the CDC. About 30 or 31 states do. Of those 30 or 31 states, Kansas ranks 25th in opioid fentanyl-related overdose deaths. So on the lower tier of the spectrum. That doesn't mean we don't have a problem. That means that other states have a bigger problem. But when you look at methamphetamine-involved overdose deaths, we're number 12 on that list. So we're in the upper third of the list of states reporting. We have a huge methamphetamine problem in our state and in the Midwest. Those are the drug seizures over the past few years by the DEA St. Louis Division. So again, that includes all of Missouri, Southern District of Illinois, and all of Kansas. You'll see the numbers of methamphetamine seizures, huge in comparison to other drug types. I did not include marijuana on that because marijuana would have been way up here and dwarfed the other ones. We had about 9,000 pounds of marijuana seized last year. Something that's disconcerting to me when I look at these numbers, the last grouping is the first quarter of our fiscal year 2023, so that's October 1 through the end of December. You can see the cocaine numbers just for the first quarter are almost equal to the entire year for 2020 and 2021. We've almost exceeded what we do typically in an entire year. So we are seeing an increase in cocaine in our area as well. And again, back to fentanyl, we're seeing fentanyl mixed with everything. If you can name a drug, fentanyl is mixed with it. It's very hard to know what you're ingesting if you're taking any drug that's not prescribed by your doctor and obtained through a reputable pharmacy. You have no idea what you're ingesting when you get a drug on the street. What do we see a lot of in our area? A lot of those M30 pills, oxycodone pills on the upper left. They are fake pills, they are not real pills. Again, if you're not getting them through a pharmacy, if you're not getting them prescribed through your doctor, you don't know what you're getting on the street. They look almost identical to the real thing. Xanax bars, we see some of those as well, Percocet. You're going to see this graphic a couple different times. I know Kim has it in her presentation as well. But DEA considers a lethal dose of fentanyl as 2 milligrams. What is located on that tip of the pencil, that's a lethal dose of fentanyl. I was looking at the stuff that you got in your folders, and there's a September 22 dated 1 pill can kill flyer in there that says 4 out of 10 pills, fake pills, contain a lethal dose of fentanyl. That number is 6 out of 10 now. So just from September 22 to now, we've gone up about 20% in fake pills containing a lethal dose of fentanyl. Those are all things that we see in our AOR, our area of responsibility. Again, massive amounts of those M30 pills. Interesting to me is the state of Kansas is the western part of our division, is drastically different from the eastern part of our division. The eastern part sees mostly powdered fentanyl, not in pill form, in fake pill form. We see mostly fake pills on the western side. A lot of that has to do with where we get drugs from. Ours come directly from the southwest border. A lot of times the St. Louis side gets theirs coming down from Chicago, and there's just different drug markets and different organizations supplying those drugs. I know this has been in the news a lot in the past several months. We do have this here. Why are drug trafficking organizations distributing pills that look like that obviously are fake pills. It's a marketing and it's a trademark technique. So listen, if their customer base is going to be young adults, right? Teenagers, young adults. Those look like fun. So that's a marketing technique. It also is a way to distinguish their product from another person's product. So again, if they have a product that's extremely potent, a user's going to want that similar high, they're going to want that product. So both marketing and trademark technique. What we've seen in the past several years is the heroin market has been almost usurped entirely by the fentanyl market. So we still see heroin, don't get me wrong, and you'll see I have a slide showing our seizures of heroin versus fentanyl. We are seeing, by and large, heroin users have moved to fentanyl. That upper left is black tar fentanyl. Sometimes it's a little bit more tarry. That's what we see more in our area. Again, St. Louis is a little bit of a different heroin market. They see a lot of white powder heroin, just different sources of supply on that. And this is a slide that shows the fentanyl and heroin trends. These are our seizures, DEA St. Louis Division seizures over the past several years. You can see, you don't need to know the individual numbers necessarily, but if you look on the far left, the numbers of fentanyl and heroin seizures are almost identical. And if you look at the upper peak, that's fiscal year 2022. Just the huge disparity between fentanyl seizures and heroin seizures. The far right is first quarter of fiscal year 2023, so that's why that's a little bit of a smaller margin. But if you multiply that margin by 4, you're going to get something that looks like fiscal year 2022. So we haven't seen much change in that regard. Again, kind of going back, methamphetamine, huge problem in our area. Generally, the clearer and the whiter it is, the more pure it is, or the more potent that it is. This is a good picture. It's not necessarily super pure methamphetamine because you'll see it's not super white, it's not super clear. This is much higher quality methamphetamine. That's a 29 kilo seizure that we got out of the spare tire of a vehicle. One thing that's difficult for law enforcement, along with that 29 kilogram load of methamphetamine, was a GPS tracker in the tire of the car. What does that mean? Somebody was tracking it. If it's on the side of the road for an exorbitant amount of time because law enforcement has stopped it, the organization supplying those drugs knows that it was stopped, so it makes it more difficult to investigate that to its conclusion. Something that we see a lot of in this area is methamphetamine suspended in solution. Methamphetamine is a solid, so this is a concealment method. Why is it used? Well, my goodness, something in a thermos that looks like a liquid that we would all, ingest, Gatorade, whatever, is law enforcement going to think that that contains methamphetamine? Not necessarily. So it's an easy way to conceal drugs. When they get it to a transport point, either to its end point or where they're going to put it back into its original form, its usable form, what they need to do is dry that out. So they'll wash it in acetone over and over, they'll dry it out, and they'll get that white, pure form of methamphetamine. Most of what we see here anymore is over 99% pure methamphetamine. Just some pictures of cocaine. A lot of times organizations that supply cocaine mark their cocaine. Again, that's a trademarking technique. They want their product to stand out from somebody else's. In marijuana, we've seen the shift. Marijuana THC content, it used to be in the 2, 3, 4% range. It's more in the 8 to 10% range now, and that's why you see differences with how people react when they ingest marijuana. Those are pictures of a THC extraction lab. Obviously, that's very popular right now. You extract the THC and you put it into food products called edibles. A lot of those are packaged very professionally. They look like candy, and kids think that they're candy. So kids might see their parents with a package like that, and they might think, oh, I want that. We have seen children ingest that and have to go to poisoning centers and die because they've ingested, their parents' marijuana. So it is a problem. When people market towards kids, that's probably the bigger problem, right? And I just wanted to end, I know we talked mostly about fentanyl today. That was a display that was at the DEA Museum in DC from May until September of last year. DEA solicited pictures of loved ones that were impacted by fentanyl. And the response was just super sad, overwhelming and super sad. Those are all people that died from ingesting fentanyl. You'll see, if you saw it up close, a lot of those are younger people, generally teenagers through, early to mid-30s. Huge problem. There's a really good documentary on YouTube, if anybody's interested, called Dead on Arrival. We showed it to the kids at the high school that I went to. And in it, the person that's moderating or narrating the documentary said, I used to tell kids, be careful about what you try because that might lead to you taking something else that might then kill you. You can't even try anything now because you don't know what you're getting when you try it. If you try it, it will kill you. And that's kind of what we need to take back to our families and loved ones and to our communities, because we're not going to reverse these numbers until we do that, until we talk about it. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity to have been here today. Happy to talk to anybody afterwards. I'm going to pass it off to Kim now. She's got a little bit more on fentanyl and what we're doing with DEA. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Am I supposed to click something? All right. Well, like Cheryl said, my name is Kim, and I'm the Community Outreach Specialist here for the DEA in Kansas City. Really, I just kind of want to recap on fentanyl and really talk about illicit fentanyl. This is a major issue that has been happening in our country for a while now. In September of 2021, the DEA came out with a public alert really warning people about the dangers of fentanyl and how there's been an increase of overdose deaths and poisonings being caused by this drug, and it's still occurring today. There's definitely has, like Cheryl said, been an increase in the deaths that we've seen. And very much like she said, just to kind of recap, the reason why fentanyl exists is really just a marketing scheme. The cartel leaders that are distributing these drugs are really just trying to make a buck. They're trying to gain profit. And there are two types of people that are affected by this. There are people who are addicted to fentanyl because fentanyl is an opioid. It is an opioid that's 50 times stronger than heroin, which is highly addictive. But there are people that are seeking out these drugs just to give them a try, and they don't know the risk that they're taking. It's really a Russian roulette game when you think about that tiny powder on the tip of that pencil and how that can be lethal to a young child, a teen, and even an adult with an average body type. Like Cheryl mentioned, in some of those pamphlets it says 4 out of 10, but a couple of months ago DEA came out with a new release saying that it's now 6 out of 10 pills seized by the DEA have a lethal dose. So what that means really is it has 2 milligrams, or it could potentially have more. You really don't know what you're going to get in a pill unless it's actually shipped out to a lab and tested. You don't really know how much fentanyl goes into each pill because there's really no oversight when these pills are being made. A lot of times when I'm talking to kids, I like to think about the chocolate chip cookie analogy. So when you think about making a batch of chocolate chip cookies, no one really measures how many chocolate chips go into each individual cookie, right? It's kind of the same concept with these pills. There's really no one out there kind of measuring how much fentanyl goes into each pills. And the DEA has learned that 2 milligrams is enough to take a life and enough to be lethal. And Cheryl kind of touched on this, very much the fentanyl pills, the M30 pills are the most popular pills that we see here in the state of Kansas. According to Midwest HIDA, in 2021, we saw a 30% increase of fentanyl seizures alone in the state. And I kind of just want to put up some numbers. We talked a little bit about how nationally in 2021 we saw 107,622 overdose deaths that were reported. In the U.S. alone, that was an average increase of about 15%. But in the state of Kansas alone, we saw around 678 overdose deaths that were reported, and that was a 43.7% increase. That's a huge increase when you think about the increase on the national average. That almost doubles the amount of overdose deaths that happen. And a lot of these deaths are caused by illicitly manufactured fentanyl as well as other synthetic opioids. And, Cheryl also touched a little bit on how there's two different types of people. And I know I mentioned there's people that are being poisoned. There's people that are taking drugs or taking M30 fake Percocet pills that don't know what's in them and ingesting fentanyl and losing their life. But there's also people who are addicted. And it's really a different game, right? The drug world is different than what it used to be when we were younger. And the CDC study came out with, it identified the youth impact of drug overdose deaths that occurred between January 2010 to June of 2021. And overall, they found that fentanyl was kind of the leading cause, not the leading cause, let me rephrase that. It found that there were more fentanyl-related drug overdose deaths than there were when you think about the other drugs, meth, cocaine. There was way more fentanyl-related deaths for adolescents who were between 14 to 18 years old. And there's also an impact when you think about substance use. There is the risk of becoming addicted or having substance use disorder when you think about ingesting these drugs. Yes, we have efforts such as Narcan that can bring someone back to life, but sometimes, it could still cause for someone to be addicted to this drug. And so we want to be mindful that youth are still not seeking these drugs, they're still not seeking pills, and kind of just staying away from them as they can. And so the DEA really is working to just provide education, provide resources, and really just kind of talking points on how we can have these conversations and continue these conversations at home, because it is a lot to endure, especially when you think about how much content goes into the whole drug industry and how these pills are made. There's powder fentanyl, there's fake prescription pills. It's a lot of information. And so we constantly want to keep these conversations going so that way people truly understand and people are really able to ask questions if there's not a lot of clarity around this topic. So I just want to briefly go over Kansas City. Our district office does have a website. We have kansascity.dea.gov, and with that website, it'll take you to a list of resources. The biggest resource that I recommend is our One Pill Can Kill website. I really like this website, not only because it's the DA's, but it really has the up-to-date information. The administrator, we're constantly putting out new information on drug trends. Like a couple months ago, we released that whole 6 out of 10 pills seized have a lethal dose. And so that's really kind of the main resource you can use to just make sure you're current with this information. Another great website that I also like to recommend, and this is really for people who work with youth or in the educator industry, operationprevention.com is a discovery education and a DEA partnership resource. So that website, operation.com, has really allowed for DEA to build a opioid drug curriculum that not only fits adults, but it fits at elementary level, middle school level, as well as high school level. And it really just allows people to take content that they're able to build off of and have these conversations that are needed. And that is my contact information. That's pretty much all I have for you guys today. So I thank you for having us, and I think we're gonna open the floor to any questions at this time.
Thank you, ladies, for that information. Are there any questions that people have? If you'll stand, I will repeat it so we can get it recorded.
My question is, what do you do about this? I mean, I knew it was coming from China, and now it's going through Mexico, through like the southern, like into California. Like you said, it gets more expensive as it, travels up. But how do you stop this?
You might as well just stay up here. The question is, how do you stop this? That she was aware that it was coming from China and that it comes through Mexico, and it takes different routes through the United States, but how do we go about stopping it? Great question.
If I had the answer to that, I'd have an extremely lucrative career moving forward. But that's, I think we're trying several different approaches, and I don't think it can be just law enforcement, and I don't think it can be just prevention sort of things like what we're doing today. It's got to be all of us working together. We can throw a lot of law enforcement resources at things, but if there's still a market where people are going to use the drugs, then they're still going to find a way to get it over. So I think we've got to work together. That would kind of be my response, and that's why I say it's so important for us to talk. It's so important for us to reduce the demand for the things that are killing people so that there's no longer an incentive to bring it over.
They're addicted, and they get those
Right.
sick,
And that's, obviously that's where treatment and everything else comes in. I think it's got to be a multifaceted approach. And I'm not up here to say that anybody has the answer. If we had the answers, we'd be implementing it now. I think that's what's kind of up for discussion. What ideas can we get from people that are working in law enforcement and people that are working in prevention and people that are working in treatment? If we're not talking, if we're not brainstorming ideas together, I don't think we're going to come up with that solution. I know that's not an answer, but I hope I didn't defer enough. I mean, there's accountability on all ends, and everybody's got to be working together on it. I think so many times those of us working in law enforcement think that the answer is law enforcement. Those that are working in prevention think that it's prevention. Or you think, oh, well, they're not doing their jobs, or they're not. It's got to be all of us working together, and it's got to involve communities as well.
So the question, just to repeat, is are we seeing it in the liquid form, and that she has experienced youth in her agency that have tested positive for marijuana or for fentanyl, but didn't know that they were taking fentanyl?
So the answer is yes, kind of. We're seeing liquid fentanyl or fentanyl in solution much like we do meth in solution. We have not seen it here yet. It's coming. Similar ways, yes, you can ingest it in a fentanyl in a liquid form, but it's also being used as a concealment method, much like methamphetamine in solution, to get it transported to avoid law enforcement detection. So is it prevalent here? No. Offhand, I cannot think of an instance where we've had liquid fentanyl here within our office, within the Kansas City District Office for DEA, but we know that it's around the country. We've heard reports from other areas, so we know it's coming.
questions? That's a great question. She's a nurse, and she's wondering how we address issues where we have folks coming out of hospitals that have been using fentanyl that are expressing that their pain levels at 10. And how do we address that? And how do we prevent that from becoming a larger problem and people seeking or that type of medication or substance on the streets?
So this is going to be way outside my lane because I'm law enforcement, right? So I can address that as a human being and not necessarily from a law enforcement standpoint or a professional standpoint. We need to have alternatives to opioids as drugs to reduce pain. We need to advertise those within our healthcare communities. And I think that's where it starts. If you ask me as a human being, again, take me in my professional job outside of this. If you ask me as a human being what I do to help that instance, it's when I accompany a family member to a doctor, I ask questions. And there's literature in the green folders that talk about asking questions. Ask your doctor, is there another way other than opioids? And having an awareness that opioids can cause addiction. So as a user or as a patient, I mean, I try to find alternatives, and I think as healthcare providers, and I'm not telling you how to do your job, that is not my role here, but I think that's probably part of the answer is finding alternatives that reduce people's pain in a non-addictive way.
My son started taking those people when he was about and is off the rack. He's got 3 years clean off of them, and he had to use methadone. He's still in the process of methadone. I'm very disgusted with the system here in Chicago. I've seen where other people that he knew would go in there and lie to him and tell them that they were taking way more drugs on the streets than what they were. So they start out at a higher level with methadone, trying to wean them off the opioids, and the fentanyl, these pills. And it's $13 a day here in Topeka. And some people have been in for 14 years. See a guy going in with his oxygen tank on, going to get his methadone, they got to go dose, And it's like they don't want to wean them off. They don't want them off of it. It's a moneymaker to them here in Topeka. So my son's fortunate enough recently, his insurance started covering it. And so we go to Lawrence every Monday. And these other people in Topeka, they can't afford the $13 a day. They're addicts. They don't have jobs. They're fucking stealing everybody's stuff. I've lost over $75,000 worth of my belongings because people are addicted to drugs. They have a job, and they were robbed every day. And so I'm really happy for the behavioral health group there in Lawrence. My son has been asking me, can I go down? Can I go down? Every 2 weeks, he asked me to go down. Last week, he's almost halfway down now. He didn't go in and lie to him. These people go in and lie to him, the addicts on the street, so they can get a free high legally. And he's funny. But this is something we need to focus on. Is get these guys help to pay and move them down and wean them off. Or they're going to continue.
I hope I have someone that can answer. But to reiterate what she has said, she has a family member who has had an addiction and who is currently using medicated assisted treatment options, methadone, and going through that process, and that there is a cost associated with that of $13 a day, and that some people come in and claim that they're using at a higher level, some come in at a lower level, and it seems like it's a money-making process versus an actual working towards helping the person.
Some people never get off of it. So I went to
Yeah.
the VA and talked to my family there, and considered the VA medical system my family, because my husband, and they said, no, that's not me. They can get out. They can leave
Okay.
them off.
So,
That's another moneymaker there.
so the question is, how do we get people to have that treatment to help them get off in a way that is affordable and safe? Do you want to handle that? I don't feel like I can handle that as a prevention person. Do we have any treatment folks in the room that might have? Do you have something you might add? Would you come up to the microphone, please? It won't hear you, so it'll just sound like that you're not answering. So thank you so much for being. You should be proud of him. That's wonderful. So thank you, Michael.
Hey, everybody, I'm Michael Colin. I'm a treatment counselor with Heartland Radac. And to answer that question, there's about 1,000,001 different answers, okay? The only way it can really answer how we're going to treat this as a whole is everybody, to our law enforcement, catching the folks on the street, to getting them in jail, to where somebody in jail might mention the treatment aspect, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to take everybody, our community members, school people, everybody like that. And with medication-assisted therapy, I just have my own professional views on that. You know, it's first of all, medication-assisted therapy. Somehow that got brought into the recovery realm, which is not necessarily true because, again, it's a medical model of treatment. And really, to answer that, you are correct. There's folks that have been on methadone now 30, 40 years. It is highly addictive and binding to all the receptors, et cetera. I view it, though, again, medication where you take as somebody who's diagnosed with diabetes. Sometimes it's just eat better, exercise. Another person goes in, gets diagnosed diabetes, same thing, they got to take a pill. Another one, all of a sudden they go in, now they're lifetime insulin dependent. Kind of what happens to a lot of folks on the methadone. But really to answer that, the addictive thinking piece, when they talk about us not being wired right, they're absolutely correct on that. I was just talking with a friend of mine, what was about 7, 8, 10 years ago when fentanyl first was hitting batches of heroin. We had like 67 deaths overnight. And the heroin users were like, we got to get a hold of that because the addict thinking the person did too much, they didn't know what they were doing, et cetera. Not ever the thought came into their minds of, wow, maybe there's something in this that's just flat out killing people. So again, you know, it's going to take everybody under the sun, and the more people we can educate on just the dangers of the use, and I like now in this era it's not, you know, hey, what's going to happen when you try it? We're pretty much, if you try this, there's about 80% chance you might die. So I know that didn't really answer much of anything, but again, it's just collectively going to take all of us.
Can methadone kill you?
Huh?
Can methadone kill you?
I can't hear you.
She said, can methadone kill you?
You know, I've actually never heard anything of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't. That would be more probably a medical question. I personally have not or professionally heard anybody dying from it. So, but it's, again, you know, if you take anything and get it out onto the streets into the wrong hands and start mixing stuff, there could be a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? We just have a few more minutes. Yes, sir.
So why don't they just move the manufacturing
Great question. He said, so why don't they move the manufacturing into the states? I'm going to refer to an expert.
Again, I don't know that I have the best answer to this or the right answer to this. I can just kind of guess. The process is probably cheaper to manufacture, put the product together south of the border than it is up in the United States. Obviously, they have, logistics and everything. But even importing from China into Mexico is a lot easier than importing mass quantities of a chemical into the United States. So I think it's probably a lot easier to avoid law enforcement detection by having that shipped from China or another country into Mexico versus directly into the United States. Now, fentanyl powder is being brought obviously into the United States, and then pills are being pressed in the United States, fake pills. So that is happening. But as far as getting the mass quantities of chemicals into the country, it's a lot easier to ship it into Mexico than it is to the United States.
I also, just for clarity, when we talk about fentanyl that the cartels are making, that is illicit fentanyl. That is not the same fentanyl drug you see on a hospital. Hospitals and healthcare providers, pharmaceutical companies, they produce fentanyl and they measure it at a microgram level. This fentanyl is way different than what you would see at a hospital grade level. This fentanyl is measured in milligrams. And so I just want to make sure that that is clear and that it's two very different types of fentanyl that's being produced. And the reason why the cartel fentanyl is way more lethal, it's because they want people to be addicted to it. So.
Her question was, isn't it realistic to think that if it's coming from Mexico, that we should secure the border more?
So this is a scary question because you could get into a lot of politics with this answer, and I don't want to. Right. So I think it's important to talk about, right? Like, what would the possible solutions be? Again, more from a human being standpoint than from a law enforcement representative from DEA being here. Sure, that's common sense, but what else are you impacting? And do you want legal products coming into the country from Mexico? If you shut down the entire border, I think you have unintended consequences, and it's not just that you're stopping fentanyl from coming over. And then I think you go back to the question over here, well, why wouldn't they just produce it in the United States? And I think they probably would. I'm not saying that that's not a logical response or answer. I just don't know that there's 100% this is perfect and this is imperfect. We have presence in DEA down in Mexico, absolutely. Now, if you ask what our relationships are down there, they may not be as good as some other countries, but yes, we absolutely have offices down there, and we work with the federales down there. Go ahead.
You mentioned a couple of efforts to combat law enforcement interventions. For me, I'm interested in, I know this happens, how the government, PA, and others locally, like educational system, what is that third leg, education, especially for consumers? Said 2 or 3 times that it needs to be understood that trying it isn't an option. Trying it to be your first and last. So what resources do communities have that they can utilize from the DEA or others to educate on an ongoing basis the youth that are the consumers why the demand is there?
So first of all, you should know this is our mayor of Topeka asking this question. Thank you, Mayor Padilla. The question is, what can we do in addition to government and education? What's the third leg of the stool to help make sure that we're doing everything we can?
I'm going to defer to Kim on this, but I appreciate the question, and part of the reason I wanted to come and talk before she does is she's not going to give herself kudos. Her position as community outreach coordinator has only existed for what, 2 years now? 2 years. So that's part of what DEA is doing. We are putting more community outreach personnel in our offices to be that conduit between what we're doing on law enforcement and what we can do in our community. So I'll let her respond to the question, but I wanted to say that's part of the answer.
Yeah, thanks for asking. At the end of my presentation, I had a plethora of resources and education that you all can go to. The link to all that is kansascity.dea.gov. And we are fortunate enough here in this area to have my position, which is an Operation Engage initiative, which really allows us to come talk to you all. It really helps the DEA to have kind of like a third-party person to be able to help communities like Topeka have the right education, have the right resources. And it really is a partnership, like Cheryl said earlier. A lot of times in the Kansas City area, and I defer to that because I'm there most of the time, but we work with different partners such as the Northland Coalition Group, we work with Johnson County Mental Health, we work with First Call, which is a prevention and recovery, and they are able to provide that healthcare resource, that treatment resource that doesn't just go, that goes along with drugs. We are able to provide that drug data, what's out there, what we're seizing, but it really takes a whole community effort. So, I really want to challenge you all to have a part 2 of this discussion. Keep the conversations going and talk to your local law enforcement, talk to, your prevention specialist, your recovery specialist, and kind of see what the community needs to combat this drug threat, because it really is a team effort, and it's something that a lot of communities are starting to realize.
I'm going to come in and add some anecdotal information in response to your question. I said at the beginning of my spiel that I've been with DEA for about 17 years now. In the first 15 years, I can tell you with absolute certainty the number of times I've been asked to talk in the community, talk to community members, go to schools. 0. In the last 2 years, probably 24 times I've been in groups like this or out talking to schools, and my colleagues have as well. So we're doing a lot more of that because I think there's been the acknowledgement that there's a huge need, but it's also a two-way street, right? So when I come out and talk to all of you, I respond to questions, I interact with you. I hear things like, my son has been off of drugs for 3 years with the assistance of methadone. Those are things that in law enforcement we don't think about, right? We're not always presented with such a personal case. And so I think the only way to strengthen our understanding of what the problem really is to get out here and talk and to listen, not just, spout those facts that I love, but listen to people and their stories. And so I think we're doing a lot more of that. I know we haven't seen it in the numbers yet, and I desperately want those numbers to start going down, but I think that's part of the answer.
And I guess I would just add to what the ladies have said, that that's a big part of what we do in Topeka at Prevention and Resiliency Services. We have a number of partners in this room, from MIR to Vallejo to Heartland Radac, and there's probably even more. We have our DECA colleagues here. We have representatives from KDHE. We have folks that represent the opioid funds that'll be coming down. We have a lot of key players in this room. We have representatives from our city, lots of community leaders, and we're here as a resource for you. If we don't have the information, we will find it for you. We will link you up with the resource that might have it. We don't have all of the answers, but we're not above working with all the people in our community to help make a difference. And we're here for education and evaluation. If we don't know the answers, we're going to link you with the care that you might need. And so I'll just work at ending right there because we're exactly 1 hour over from the 10:33 from the 9:33 start time. And again, would you just join me in thanking these ladies for being here today? And then please, if you would take a moment and just fill out our survey. You can scan the QR code. It's in the middle of your table. This really helps us to know if your time was used valuably this morning, and if we can improve, we want to improve. So please give us honest feedback. We're here to help, and if you need us, there's information on how to reach us in your folders. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it.